Sakshi TV's special immigration show with attorney Ms. Prashanthi Reddy from Law Offices of Prashanthi Reddy PLLC. Please note that Sakshi TV now has 3 immigration shows every week. On Tuesday at 3 p.m. EST with attorney Ms. Sheila Murthy, Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. EST with attorney Prashanthi Reddy in English, and on Friday at 6 p.m. EST with attorney Bhanu Ilindra. Please tune in to ask your questions. If you are an immigration attorney and would like to join our special shows, please email us at usa@sakshi.com or call 866-725-7441. Before we begin the show, please note that the information provided on this show is not legal advice and is for general informational purposes only. Sakshi TV or its agents will not be responsible for use of information. If you need specific legal advice, please contact the attorney directly. Ms. Prashanthi Reddy needs no introduction, but if you need consultation, please log on to reddyesq.com for contact information. And when you connect with them, don't forget to mention Sakshi TV. From the beginning, reddyesq.com has put a wealth of free information and online tools in the hands of immigrant community and for the benefit of US employers. The reddyesq.com site provides you with the latest and cutting-edge information on US immigration law and policies explained in terms you don't have to be a lawyer to understand. Today's topic is employment-based green cards part 2, especially the I-140. We will continue the knowledge session along with the news and updates on latest immigration, followed by Q&A. Before we get into the topic, you can call us on the numbers displayed on the screen for questions related to immigration and also ask for tips. Hello, Ms. Reddy.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. I hope you're doing well too. So, Ms. Reddy, do we have any latest immigration updates for this week?
Not really, just that the travel ban is finally going to be lifted, but I think it's not really new information, but just for those who don't know, travel ban is going to be lifted, and in place of that, they're going to have a system of vaccinations. So for those people who are fully vaccinated, they will be allowed to travel to the US.
Do we have a date yet as to when officially the travel ban would be lifted?
I believe it's November 8th, if I'm not mistaken.
November 8th, right. So, Ms. Reddy, since we're talking about employment-based green cards, so what are the most asked FAQ is, what are the processing times of the employment-based green cards? Does it differ for EB1 to EB2 to EB3?
Yeah, processing times differ, but you also have premium processing for I-140s, and not only do they differ based on the categories, there's so many different categories for an I-140, which we will get into shortly, but it also differs based on when you're filing. Processing times don't always remain static, but every year and every month it keeps changing. So it could range from anywhere from 2 to 3 months to 6 to 7 months. And if there is a request for further evidence, then of course that processing time is further increased. Because you'll receive the request for evidence, then you submit the document, so it increases the processing time.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, what are the allotted visa numbers for each of these categories? Does it differ or is it taken as a whole?
So, the visa numbers, again, they're presuming that people know what visa numbers mean. But, so for every country, there's visa numbers allotted. We're talking about, when we say visa numbers, though it's a little confusing, but we're actually talking about green card numbers.
Right.
And so the green card numbers change, or rather, there's a total of a certain number of green cards allotted every year worldwide. And out of that total number, every country is given 7% of the green cards. So India is given 7%. And the reason why Indian nationals have to wait much longer for the green card when compared to other nationalities is that there is a more demand for Indians. So there's more number of people applying. So it seemed the wait is obviously much more because that 7% is not enough for Indian nationals. So again, it differs based on the demand. So for example, EB1, which is the employment-based category 1, when you file an I-140, has a less waiting period. And for most countries, it's actually current. There's no waiting period. Because there are not that many people who qualify for that exceptional ability or that EB1 category. The other categories such as EB2 and EB3 are the run-of-the-mill, cases, I-140 cases that are filed for most people. They use either EB2, they fall under either EB2 or EB3, and that's why the demand is the highest for them. And therefore, even though the number of visas for all categories is the same, it takes much longer for EB2 and EB3 cases to get approved, for the green cards to get approved, because the demand is much higher and more number of cases being filed, and it's the same amount of visa numbers being available.
Right.
So that happens.
Yes, Ms. Reddy, please go on.
No, you can ask your next question.
Right, so I mean that brings me to my next FAQ. I mean, what is an I-140, Ms. Reddy? Is it the same as a green card?
So the I-140 is the second stage in the green card. In a regular, typical employment-based green card, you have the labor cert, which is something that is filed with the Labor Department, which we talked about last week, where you're filing an application. First, you're actually placing advertisements to make sure that there are no candidates available for that particular position. There are no US citizens or permanent residents available for that particular job. And then you are basically filing the perm after all the ads are done and you receive resumes. If you receive any resumes, you have to see whether you can disqualify them, etc. So that's the initial stage, which is the labor cert stage. Labor certification, because it's filed with the Labor Department.
Right.
Once that's approved, it's the second stage, which is the I-140. And this is basically nothing but an immigrant petition, an immigrant visa filing. So the I-140, in the I-140, what you're doing is you're, of course, submitting the form I-140, in which you're giving information with reference to the employer, the job, the salary, the wages being paid. You're also submitting supporting documentation to show that the beneficiary qualifies for the positions. When you're filing a labor cert, you're just stating the positions, but you're not actually submitting any documents. You're just stating this position and this is the requirement, the educational requirement, but you're not submitting any documents to show that the beneficiary actually is qualified. You're doing that in an I-140, which is the immigrant petition stage, the second stage. So you're submitting documents showing the beneficiary's degrees, the qualifications, the experience letters, skill sets. If he has, if that was a requirement in the perm, usually we put in special requirements and we say XYZ skills are required, especially in an IT position. So that is done. That is submitted to show that they have experience letters, degree copies, and also we submit the ability to pay. That's the big issue in the I-140. The employer at this stage has to show that they have the ability to pay the prevailing wage. So it's not actually, they don't have to actually show that they're paying the prevailing wage, but they have to show through their tax return. So obviously a tax return has to be submitted. They have to show through their tax returns that either they're already paying the person, which will be showed actually through the W-2 of the employee, or if they're not already paying, that they have enough profits in the tax return to be able to pay the prevailing wage. The prevailing wage is something that once when you're filing the perm, because you do a prevailing wage determination and you get that approval before you actually file the perm. So that's the wage that you have to show ability to pay for in the I-140 part. So that's pretty much what an I-140 is. It's an immigrant visa petition.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, that brings me to my next question. How long does it take to process an I-140?
So as we were discussing, the processing time keeps changing depending on which year we're at, what USCIS's workload is. But usually, if you do premium processing, they're supposed to respond in 30 days. So you'll at least get a response. That could be an approval or that could be a request for further evidence. And after that, if you're doing regular processing, then it could take 6 to 8 months or 4 to 6 months, again, depending on how quickly USCIS is working on their cases. That's the usual processing time for an I-140.
Right. So, and how can a person file for the I-140?
Okay, so When you're filing for an I-140, you have to submit a $700 fee. That's a USCIS fee. You have to submit the form I-140. You have to fill that out and submit it. Then you have to submit, and all this is done via email, by mail, regular mail, or FedEx or whatever, but it's not online. It's not an online submission. So you're submitting the I-140 form, you're submitting the check for $700, and you're submitting all your supporting documents. So basically, you're submitting your PERM approval, the original PERM approval that is signed in original, that has to be submitted, because that's the basis on which the I-140 is being filed. If that is the basis on which the I-140 is being filed, it doesn't have to be, but if it is, then the PERM approval. And then you have to submit your passport copy, proof that you're in status, so your I-94 copy or your I-797. If you're on H1, then the H1 approval. If you're on H4, then the I-539 approval or the H4 approval. So you have to submit all those approvals to show status. You have to submit a letter from your employer stating that they are willing to continue the process and to hire you for this permanent position. You have to submit pay stubs and your W-2 to show if there are any issues about ability to pay that can possibly take care of it. Because if you're already being paid the prevailing wage, then that is not even an issue. You have to submit the tax returns of the company, and the profits in the tax returns is what is looked at. Or they could look at something called net current assets, which is in the Schedule L of the company tax returns. So these are the two figures looked at, either the profits or taxable income, as you would call it. And the second thing they look at is net current assets, which is your current assets minus your current liabilities. And that's in Schedule L. So that either that number or the number in the profits. So that number has to be more than the prevailing wage, or if you're already on the payroll of the company, then it has to be, and if you are not being paid, say the prevailing wage, you're being paid a little bit less, then the difference has to be covered in those, either in the profits or the net current assets. So you're submitting your tax return, you're submitting your degree copies to show that you qualify for the job. For example, in the PERM, say we asked for a master's degree in computer science. So you have to submit your degree copy with the transcripts, and in addition to that, an evaluation, an educational evaluation obtained from an evaluation services, showing that you have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in computer science or master's degree in computer science, whatever the requirement might be. So that has to be submitted. So these are the documents that are usually sent out with an I-140 and along with the form and the check. So in a nutshell, that's what's needed for an I-140 application.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, could you explain to us how premium processing works for an I-140?
Premium processing is simply you're paying that $2,500 extra for premium processing. And then previously they would actually get back to you in 15 days. Now they've increased the premium processing fee as well as the time that they take to get back to you, because they know there's no one to question it. And people are so desperate that they'll pay whatever fee they're asked to pay. So they've increased the fee to $2,500 and they've increased the processing time to 30 days from 15 days. So once you pay the fee, then you will get a response within that 30 days, or they will refund the fees. So they're not obligated to process the case in 30 days, even if you premium process. But if they accept a premium processing check, then they're obligated to, process the case in 30 days. Otherwise, they have to refund the check. Now, all cases may not be qualified for premium processing. They keep changing the types of I-140s that qualify. Sometimes EB1s don't qualify, sometimes they do. So that keeps changing every year. So you have to look at the USCIS website for what the recent notices are as to which cases qualify for premium processing and which don't. In addition to that, there could be some instances in which you cannot file premium processing for a certain case, which otherwise you could have. This is basically in the cases where you are refiling an I-140. For example, you're downgrading or upgrading your I-140 between EB2 or EB3. Or you're amending your I-140 because it could be any reason. It could be that your company was bought by another company, so now you have to show that the new company still qualifies, and in that case, you would file an amendment under successor in interest. So in some of these instances, or it could be that your I-140 was denied, and then you're filing another I-140, a second one. In all these instances, since you're not submitting the original labor certification, they don't usually allow premium processing. Of course, there are exceptions. Recently, when we filed I-140s in October, they did not allow premium processing for downgrade cases. But then later on, when we requested the premium processing, in some instances they've accepted it. In some instances, they've said that premium process again after 30 days, and we will get your file by then. And they send back the premium processing, then we send it back in 30 days, and then they're premium processing. So in some instances, premium processing is possible. In some instances, it's not. But it's generally a good idea to premium process, especially if you have a time constraint. For example, say your H1 is expiring in 6 months. You need your I-140 to be approved in order to get further extensions on your H1, because your H1, you're maxing out the 6-year period. So the only way you can go beyond 6 years on the H1 is if you have an I-140 approved. So it is possible to do that based on an I-140 approval. So you're in a rush to get that approval. So premium processing might be a good idea in that instance.
Right.
So that's a little of premium processing.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, can a petitioner request for premium processing while their I-140 is pending?
Yeah, so it can sometimes happen that they don't initially premium process because they want to wait and see, or they don't want to do it initially, but they change their minds. That's absolutely possible. The only thing is you have to wait for the receipt, premium processing receipt, to actually convert the case to premium processing, because without a receipt, they will not be able to track your file. So once you get the receipt, then you can, along with the receipt, send out the premium processing application, which is the I-907 form, and the check for $2,500 to USCIS requesting that the case be converted to premium processing.
Right. Right. Ms. Reddy, so what measures can a petitioner take to ensure that their I-140 is, does not get rejected by the USCIS?
So, in order to answer that question, we have to know why, USCIS would potentially reject a case, or what documents are needed, in order to prove, in order to get that case approved. So first thing is, of course, there's the very basic stuff, such as, make sure that you're sending out the right form. There are various editions to an I-140. Make sure you send out the right edition. Follow all the instructions carefully. Fill out all parts of the form. If you don't fill out some parts, then, or if you don't tick mark something that has to be tick marked, then the case can come back. If it's not signed, then of course, the case can come back. Usually an original signature is needed. Now due to COVID, they're accepting photocopies, but at other times, original signatures are needed. If you don't have that, the case will come back. Make sure you write the correct check for the I-140, and find out what the check is, what the amount is, because that keeps changing. So you want to make sure that you have up-to-date information on what the check is. Write down the correct number. Don't make typographical errors on the check, and that's a sure way of, the case coming back. So that's some of the basic reasons why they would come back. The case can come back, but in addition to that, there's some substantive reasons based on which I-140 can get rejected, meaning it can get denied. So the one thing, rejection is one thing. Rejection is when it comes back without being processed from the mail room, and those are the issues that I just mentioned with reference to when a case can get rejected. But we should also talk about when a case can get denied. Denied is they're accepting the case, they process it, maybe they send a request for information, and then the case gets denied. So this is more substantive reasons for denial. So if the beneficiary, for example, doesn't qualify for the job, you've asked for a master's, but the beneficiary has only a bachelor's, doesn't have the equivalent of a master's, then the case can get denied. If you don't have the ability to pay, as we talked about earlier, because you're not paying the beneficiary the prevailing wage, and also maybe because you don't have the additional net current assets or profits to cover that difference in the prevailing wage. For both reasons, then it'll get denied based on ability to pay. Now, they also when they look at ability to pay, they look at sometimes the total picture. They look at the number of cases that you filed, and then they want to make sure they ask for a table of number of cases filed and to show ability to pay on each case. So they're asking for an overall picture of how many cases were filed, and if you have the combined ability to pay for all cases put together, and that sometimes can be really difficult to show. So, just as a tip there, make sure it's always good to pay your employee the prevailing wage if you're filing a green card for them, so that you don't have to show, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and then pay those additional taxes when you may not have needed to otherwise. So these are some of the reasons. Of course, there could be, it could be that you're out of status. You have to be in status if you're in the country to file an I-140. If you're out of status, then they won't approve that I-140. So that's another reason that they might deny it. So these are some of the reasons why an I-140 might get denied.
Right. So what can be, so if these are the reasons that it can be rejected, then the viewers have to just take care that, when they're filing for this particular form, they have to just make sure, ensure that their form gets through. But what happens if an incorrect category is selected in the Part 2 of the form I-140?
Right. So that comes under typographical error or not putting in the right marking the right column. So as we were discussing, there's EB1, EB2, EB3, right? Exceptional ability, so many different categories in an I-140. So if you put in the wrong category, you put in a category that you didn't intend to, rather, and if the person doesn't qualify for that category, then the case will simply get denied and you have to refile it. But if you put in a category, say you filed a labor cert for an EB2, but you put in EB3, the person still qualifies because he's overqualified for the position. You've asked for an advanced degree, so he has more, and the EB3 is just a bachelor's degree, but he has more than that, so he qualifies for EB2 as well as EB3. Then it's possible that the case will get approved, but it will get approved for EB3, and you may not want that result. So you might have to refile anyway. So it really depends on what kind of error there is, but you have to make sure that you don't make an error with reference to a category because it could very well get denied.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, can a petitioner request consideration for multiple visa categories?
So, I guess your question is it possible to file under more than one category for an I-140?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. You can file using the same labor. You can file, if you qualify, you can file one I-140 under EB2 and you can file another I-140 under EB3, provided your perm was filed as EB2 to start off with, because then you qualify for the lower level. But if your perm was filed as EB3, then you obviously don't qualify for EB2. You only qualify for EB3. So then only that one visa petition can be filed. But otherwise you can file for both EB2 and EB3. So yes, and if you qualify for EB1, you can file a separate I-140. For an EB1 category, labor certs are not required, and we haven't gone into that, but that's the extraordinary ability category. You file an I-140 directly.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, what special steps should be taken, to file a form, to file an I-140 that requires a DOL approved verification, labor certificate?
So So you have to make sure that the labor certification, the original. So previously, again, they used to have the original blue sheet labor certification. So you had to send in that blue sheet, which was signed in original by the employer and the employee and the attorney. Now there is no blue sheet, but original signatures are also not required because of COVID. But once things get back to normal, I think they will require original signatures again. Again, now it's just photocopy of signatures. So you have to make sure that you're following what the regulations are or what the guidance is at that given point of time. So signatures, sending out the labor certification, these are the most important. Without that, if you send out an I-140, it'll simply be denied because or it might be rejected actually in the mail room. It won't even be processed if there's no firm approval sent along with the I-140. So that's a really important part of the I-140 application when the I-140 is done based on firm.
Right. So, Ms. Reddy, we are moving towards the last question for our session today. Is there a particular way to organize evidence for the file, for the form I-140 petition?
Every, I guess, firm has a different way of organizing it, but most firms will use the same, guidelines. They will put in the forms first, a cover letter, then the forms, and then they will put in a proof of status because that's very important. Then they'll put in, I guess, pay stubs or proof of financial status, W-2s, pay stubs. And then they will most probably put in their educational credentials, experience letters, and then put the I-94, the latest I-94 approval, and then the passport copy is, what I would follow. And of course, tax returns after that.
Right. So that's it for today, Ms. Reddy. We have covered most of the FAQs for the I-140. Thank you for being on our show. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
You're watching Sakshi TV Live, and this is Todni Makana. Thank you.